My parents said it's just a reunion, but I found out the party was about my brother. Before we dive in, Reddit Pearls needs your help. The channel is struggling, and every like and sub makes a huge difference. I appreciate you sticking around. Now, let's jump into the story. Yeah, my family told me not to worry about the reunion they were planning, said it was just a chill get-together. But when I saw the photos, it was a full-blown celebration. And the guest of honor? My brother. The one I hadn't seen in 2 years. The one I wasn't invited to welcome home. The message from my dad landed with the kind of thud you don't notice at first, but hours later, it echoes. It was short, almost dismissive, just a little get-together this weekend. Backyard potluck. That was all. Nothing about who it was for. Nothing about Ryan. Nothing to suggest that it wasn't just some random Saturday gathering with cold pasta salad and folding chairs. But something about it felt off. Maybe it was the way it was worded. Too vague. Too nonchalant. My gut knew better, even before I opened social media. And that's where it hit me. Scrolling through my feed later that night, I stopped cold. A cousin had posted a group shot. Ryan, my brother, my only sibling, stood in the middle of my parents' backyard, arms thrown around mom and dad. A massive banner stretched behind them in bright colors. Welcome home, Ryan. The photo was full of smiling faces. People I hadn't seen in years. Distant relatives. Old family friends. Even his former high school football coach. I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't anywhere near the photo. I wasn't invited to be. What made it worse was how many people were tagged. Friends. Neighbors. People who hadn't spoken to Ryan in years. They were all there, arms raised, drinks clinking, while I sat alone in my apartment, finding out by accident that the biggest family event of the year had already started, without me. Ryan had been overseas for nearly 2 years. During that time, I was the one staying in touch. I checked in when he missed holidays. I helped his fiancée organize care packages and picked out snacks he liked. I even designed the original flyer for his welcome home party back when they first discussed doing something small. I wasn't expecting a spotlight, but I hadn't expected silence. I stared at that picture for way too long, convincing myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe the guest list changed last minute. Maybe there was a second event planned that I was invited to. Maybe someone forgot to forward me the details. But there was no second message. No, oops, meant to tell you. Nothing. Just silence. I called my dad. I didn't go into it angry, just confused. He picked up after a couple rings, sounding relaxed. Like everything was fine. Oh, yeah, Ryan's back. He didn't want to make a big deal of it. Just invited a few folks. You know how it is. A few folks? The picture looked like a wedding reception. It's not personal, he said, as if that was supposed to make it better. We just had to keep things tight. Can't invite everyone. Everyone. Except the person who'd been there the whole time. Except for his sibling. I didn't argue. I just listened. And when I felt that pressure in my chest grow too tight, I told him I had to go and ended the call. No dramatic exit. Just a quiet one. I sat there on my couch, watching the last light of the day filter through the blinds. It wasn't just about a missed invite. It was about what it confirmed. I wasn't forgotten. I was excluded. And they didn't even think I'd notice. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't send a guilt-laced follow-up message. I just sat in that stillness and let the realization settle. If they couldn't make room for me at a moment like this, maybe I didn't belong in that picture at all. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying that conversation with my dad, the tone of his voice, so casual, so sure that I'd be fine with being pushed to the side. As if I'd overreact by simply asking why no one had thought to include me. By morning, the photo from my cousin had made its rounds. More comments. More, so happy for your family. And this looks amazing. And Ryan must feel so loved. Loved. It echoed, louder than it should have. Because if this is what being loved looked like, then I wasn't sure what I'd been receiving all this time. I didn't text Ryan. I didn't message anyone in the group chat. Instead, I packed a bag. Not with the angry impulse to storm out, but with a deliberate calm. I needed space, somewhere quiet, somewhere I could breathe without feeling like I was standing on the outside of my own life. I drove 4 hours to a quiet coastal town. Not a big beach destination, just a sleepy shoreline where people went to disappear for a few days. I checked into a simple motel near the water, where the receptionist barely glanced up when I gave her my name. That anonymity felt like a gift. My room was small, clean, but lived in. A fan buzzed in the corner. The curtains smelled faintly like salt and sunscreen. I dropped my bag, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the stillness sink into my chest. I didn't plan anything. No sightseeing. No social media. I turned off my phone and tossed it into a drawer. The digital noise could wait. Instead, I walked down the length of the boardwalk, through empty stretches of beach, into corner cafes where no one asked where I was from or what brought me here. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't have to explain myself. I bought a notebook from a drugstore and started writing. Not poetry or some dramatic manifesto, just pieces of thought. What I remembered from childhood. What I felt in that moment. What I wish someone had said to me that day. And in those scribbled pages, I started to see a version of myself I hadn't met in years. One that didn't need approval to feel worthy. One that didn't need to be invited to prove they mattered. Back home, I imagined the party had wrapped up. Plate stacked high. The music is fading out. Maybe Ryan was back in his old room. Maybe someone had finally realized I wasn't there. But no one called. And I didn't expect them to. By the second day, I stopped counting how many hours I'd been gone. It was a strange freedom, being out of reach, untraceable. No buzzing phone, no passive-aggressive messages asking why I wasn't at the brunch or checking in to remind me of how dramatic I could be. Just silence. And for once, that silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like relief. I spent the morning on a weathered bench near the shore, scribbling in my notebook. The tide rose and fell in slow, rhythmic motions while gulls caught overhead. I'd been writing so much that I'd already flipped through half the pages. It wasn't just about the party anymore. It was about everything. Old birthdays where I felt like a formality. Holidays where my gifts were opened and then quickly forgotten. Every little dismissal I brushed aside because I thought that's what love sometimes looked like. Later that afternoon, I made the mistake of turning my phone back on. It only took a second to regret it. The screen flooded with notifications. Missed calls from an aunt. A voicemail from mom. Several photos were tagged by relatives. But the one that stopped me came from my cousin again. Another group shot. This time, it wasn't just posed. It was staged. Everyone was wearing matching t-shirts, custom printed with Ryan's name and deployment dates. There was a cake, 3 tiers tall, decorated like an American flag. Balloons arched over the food table. A slideshow was projected across a makeshift screen. And dead in the center of it all was my brother, beaming. The caption read, "The kind of night you'll never forget." And they hadn't. They just hadn't thought I was supposed to remember it, too. I stared at the photo for a long time. It wasn't the celebration that hurt. It was the effort. All the things I would have helped plan. Things I used to help plan. Every detail they told me wasn't necessary or too complicated before. It was only too complicated when I was involved. I put my phone back down and didn't bother to listen to the voicemail. Whatever it said wouldn't change the fact that they'd created a memory they didn't want me in. The sun was starting to set when I wandered back out. I sat in the sand and watched the horizon blur between sky and water, thinking about how easy it had been for them to close a door without even realizing it. Or maybe they had. Maybe they just didn't expect I'd notice or leave it closed. That was the moment I knew I wasn't going to let them explain this away. No vague excuses. No guilt trips. I didn't want a seat at a table where I'd only be offered crumbs. So I stayed where I was. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like exactly where I was supposed to be. Update. I thought I was done. I did. After seeing those photos, after sitting with the silence and deciding it wasn't worth trying anymore, I truly believed that chapter had closed. But closure doesn't always come when you choose it. Sometimes it arrives as a text you never expected to receive. It was late. The motel curtains were drawn, the room lit only by the dull orange glow of the street lamp outside. I had just finished journaling for the night when I caved and turned my phone back on, mostly out of habit. One message. Not from Mom. Not from Dad. Not even from Ryan. It was from my cousin Lily. "Hey, I didn't know you weren't invited. That wasn't right. I'm sorry." 12 words. That's all it said. But it cracked something open. Lily wasn't someone I was especially close to. We'd grown up together, drifted apart in college, exchanged birthday texts at best. But she noticed. And more than that, she cared enough to say something. It didn't fix anything. But it reminded me I wasn't imagining the weight of what had happened. The next morning, I got another message. This time from my mom. Longer. Rambling. Full of excuses that didn't land. "We didn't think you'd want to come. You've been so distant lately. It wasn't a big deal, just last minute." All the predictable lines meant to soften a decision they didn't want to own. I read every word without reacting. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like begging for recognition I should have never had to fight for. I didn't reply. Not right away. I let the sun rise. I walked the beach again. I ordered the same breakfast from the same corner cafe. I let the world remind me how much larger it was than the corner I used to shrink into. Later that afternoon, I finally responded. "Thanks for the message. I saw the pictures. I hope everyone had a good time." No anger. No accusations. Just the kind of calm that says, you don't get to decide how this ends. There was no reply after that. Not for days. And when it came, it was short. "Hope to see you at Thanksgiving." I didn't answer. Because sometimes, peace isn't what you find in reconciliation, it's what you find in walking away and not needing to be pulled back in. The days after that message stretched like slow-moving waves, quiet, consistent, and just a little bit cold. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. The kind of emotion I felt now was more detached, like I'd pulled up the anchor that kept me tethered to needing their validation. I kept my phone off most of the time. Not because I feared more messages, but because I didn't want to be pulled back into orbit. There's a certain clarity that comes with distance, and I wasn't ready to lose that just yet. Every morning, I followed the same rhythm. Coffee from the same sleepy corner cafe, long walks along the empty beach, and afternoons sketching in a notebook I'd bought on a whim. I hadn't drawn in years, but now the pages were slowly filling with tiny portraits of strangers I passed or memories I didn't want to write down in words. The silence from my family didn't feel cruel anymore. It just felt like confirmation. They had their version of what family looked like, and I no longer needed to twist myself into it. What surprised me more than anything, though, was how light I began to feel. Without the mental calculations, how to phrase a message so it wouldn't be misread, how to show up just enough to be included, I felt like I had space in my own life for the first time in years. I was no longer orbiting someone else's celebration, someone else's comfort. The world didn't shift when I went quiet. It just made room for me to notice things again. The sound of ocean foam pulling away from the shore, the flick of a bird's wings overhead, the joy in finishing a chapter of a book without thinking about what I was missing online. And then one night, it rained. Not a dramatic, stormy kind of rain. Just a quiet drizzle, soft enough to open the window and let it in. I curled up on the motel bed, sketchbook on my lap, phone face down, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Stillness. Not numbness. Not distance. Stillness. The kind of stillness that told me I didn't need to fight to be seen anymore. Because I saw myself now, and that was enough. The rain passed by morning, leaving behind a sky rinsed clean and streets still damp, the scent of wet pavement mixing with sea salt in the air. I stood outside the motel room, coffee in hand, watching a seagull pull breadcrumbs from a paper bag someone had dropped near the parking lot. It was an ordinary scene, unremarkable, and somehow, it felt more real than any family gathering I'd been excluded from. I hadn't spoken to anyone back home since I sent that last text. No calls, no guilt-laced voice messages, no surprise apologies. Just silence. And for once, I didn't interpret the quiet as punishment. I took it as permission. Permission to stay away. Permission to let go of the version of myself who constantly sought permission. Later that afternoon, I wandered into a local bookstore. It was the kind of place with creaky floors and handwritten staff recommendations stuck under every other title. I picked out a novel at random, one about a woman who vanishes from her hometown and builds a life elsewhere, and bought it without reading the back. I read half of it in a single sitting on the beach. The main character wasn't running away. She was choosing something new. Choosing herself. I thought about that a lot over the next few hours. How often I'd gone back after being sidelined. How many times I'd let my hurt be talked over, minimized, or folded into someone else's comfort. The pattern was always the same. They'd cross a line. I'd shrink back to make space for their excuses, and we'd repeat the dance with slightly different music. But something had shifted now. I didn't want to go back. Not out of spite, but because I didn't want to resume pretending. I didn't want to slide back into a role that only worked when I was willing to disappear a little. Back in the motel room, I took out my phone again. I scrolled through old texts. Birthday wishes that came hours late. Invitations that sounded more like obligations. Messages that felt like afterthoughts. I deleted most of them. Not in anger, but as a way to clear space for something else. Whatever came next. That evening, I sat on the balcony, watching as the horizon swallowed the last light of day. My sketchbook sat open beside me, half-filled pages fluttering in the breeze. I didn't need to draw anything that night. I just let the stillness sit with me. There was a time when I would have given anything to be part of the crowd in that backyard, but not anymore. Now, I was more interested in building a space where I didn't have to ask for a seat, because I was the one setting the table. Update. I left the beach town a week later. No announcement. No goodbye post. Just a quiet checkout, a warm thank you to the motel clerk, and a slow drive along the coast before heading inland. The sky was overcast, but the kind of overcast that feels protective rather than gloomy. Like the world knew I wasn't going back to the same life, and wanted to give me some shade for the transition. I didn't return home right away. I stayed with a friend for a few days. We didn't talk much about what had happened, just shared dinners, long walks, and the kind of casual silence that doesn't ask anything of you. She didn't try to offer solutions. She just made space. And that, more than anything, reminded me what being seen should feel like. Eventually, I went back to my apartment. It was untouched, just as I had left it, but something about it felt different. Like the air had shifted. Or maybe it was me. I moved more deliberately, slower somehow, not because I was tired, but because I no longer felt like I was chasing something. I didn't reach out to my family, and they didn't reach out to me. The holidays came and went with nothing more than a group message filled with emojis and generic well wishes. I read it and felt nothing. Not anger, not grief, just a quiet acceptance that they were moving forward, and so was I. And yet, I wasn't bitter. That surprised me. I thought letting go would feel heavy, but it didn't. It felt like finally setting down a bag I didn't know I'd been carrying my whole life. I started drawing more. Not just sketches in a notebook, but real pieces. Ones that took time. I opened a small online shop. Nothing big, but enough to feel like I was creating something that had my name on it. Something no one could take credit for, overlook, or forget. Sometimes, I still get updates from distant relatives. I don't block them. I just let the messages sit there, unread. It's not punishment. It's peace. Because walking away isn't always dramatic. Sometimes, it's just deciding that the door that closed behind you doesn't need to be reopened. And if anyone ever wonders why I didn't come back, why I didn't argue, fight, or plead, I hope they understand it wasn't because I didn't care. It's because I finally understood I didn't have to prove I belonged. I always did. They just didn't notice until I was gone. Have you ever been left out of something that should have been yours to attend? Would you confront your family, or would you do what I did and disappear? Drop your thoughts below.